He spared her life to save her honor. But right now, standing in the deafening silence of the Victor suite, she only wanted him dead. Or perhaps she just wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole, scales and all. Vespera stood rigid against the far wall, her dorsal spines locked in a defensive flare that made her shoulders ache. The suite was luxurious by arena standards. Soft amber lighting, air that didn't smell of ozone and burnt plasma, and a sprawling synth-skin couch. But to her, it was a cage, a very plush, very humiliating cage. She watched the human, Kyle, with unblinking, slit-pupiled eyes. He was doing something incomprehensible. He was rummaging. There was no grand speech, no demand for her fealty, no ceremonial removal of her armor to signify her transition from warrior to servant. Instead, on the mammalian conqueror was bent over a supply crate, tossing aside ration packs and muttering to himself. "Damn it, is there no actual water in this place?" Kale mumbled, his voice rough with fatigue. "I mean, honestly, electrolytes are great, but sometimes a guy just wants hydration that isn't neon blue." Vespera's dual hearts hammered against her ribs, an erratic rhythm that made her dizzy. This was the torture then, the waiting. Alien arrogance meets human adaptability, she thought bitterly. He was ignoring her. It was a power play. It had to be. He was letting her stew in her shame before he gave the order that would strip away the last of her dignity. "Found it," Kyle sighed, cracking the seal on a clear pouch. He took a long swig, his throat bobbing, then turned to face her. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, a gesture so casual, so unguarded, it made Vespera's combat instincts twitch. He blinked, seemingly surprised she was still standing at attention. "You know, you can sit down," he said, gesturing vaguely with the water pouch. "The furniture is fairly decent, better than the slab in the holding cells anyway." Vespera didn't move. Her voice was a low rasp, vibrating in her chest. "I await your command, Dominus. Do not mock me with comfort." Kyle flinched. The word Dominus seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking pained. "Okay, first off, don't call me that. Seriously, it makes my skin crawl. Secondly, look, Vespera, you're leaking. I am..." "What?" He pointed a blunt finger toward her left flank. There, beneath the jagged tear in her ceremonial mesh, a slow trickle of violet hemolymph was staining her scales. The adrenaline of the match was fading, and with it, the natural analgesic blockers of her biology. The pain arrived in a sharp, hot wave, causing her knees to buckle slightly. "Rigid tradition is a weakness," her father used to say, usually before punishing her for improvising in the ring. She had always believed him. You stood tall until you broke. But as her vision blurred, she watched Kale cross the room not with the swagger of a victor, but with the hurried, clumsy concern of a medic. "Sit. Please," he said, dropping the water pouch on a table and reaching for her. Vespera recoiled, a hiss escaping her throat. If he touched her, if he laid a hand on her without the ritual servitum, it was a violation worse than death. It was pity. Kyle froze, hands raised, palms open. "What, the universal sign of surrender?" Okay. No touching?" "I get it," he said softly, his voice dropping an octave. "But if you pass out, you're going to hit your head on that table, and I really don't want to explain to the guards why my guest has a concussion." "Guest!" The word hung in the air, foreign and absurd. Vespera's legs betrayed her. She slid down the wall, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Her thermal regulation was failing. She could feel the cold creeping into her extremities, turning her vibrant emerald scales a dull, slate gray. Kyle didn't wait for permission this time. He knelt beside her, his movements stripped of any aggression. He smelled of sweat and old dust. But underneath that, there was something else. something warm and biological, like sun-baked stone. "I'm going to clean this," he murmured, opening a small packet he'd snagged from the crate. "It's going to sting. I mean, I assume it stings. I don't know if your species does the whole stinging thing, but brace yourself." He pressed a damp cloth to her side. Vespera gasped, her claws digging into the carpet. It burned, then cooled. She watched his face, inches from her own. He wasn't looking at her with lust or triumph. His brow was furrowed, the tip of his tongue caught between his teeth in sheer concentration. He looked worried. "Why?" she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "You won. I am yours. You should be resting, not tending." Kyle laughed, a short, dry sound. "Yeah, well, humans are weird. We pack bond with anything. Give us a Roomba with a knife taped to it, and we'll name it Stabby and protect it with our lives." He taped a synth flesh bandage over the wound, his fingers brushing against the sensitive ridges of her abdomen. The touch was electric, not painful, but overwhelming. Her species was tactile only in violence or mating. This casual, gentle contact sent a confusing spike of dopamine through her nervous system. Her heart skipped a beat, sinking for a fraction of a second with the steady, slow thrum she could sense coming from him. He sat back on his heels, inspecting his handiwork. "There. Not pretty, but it'll hold." Vespera stared at the bandage. It was crooked. "You are a terrible medic," she said, though the venom was gone from her voice. "I was an accountant before the draft, Vespera," he retorted with a tired grin. "You're lucky I didn't try to file your taxes." He stood up, groaning as his own joints popped, and offered her a hand. For a moment she stared at it. It was scarred, well, not calloused and utterly alien. Tradition demanded she slap it away. Tradition demanded she die rather than accept aid from the enemy who defeated her. But the cold was seeping into her bones, and he was radiating heat like a furnace. Trust is often built through shared adversity rather than shared values. The thought was hers, new and unbidden. She looked at the door, locked from the outside. They were trapped in this gilded cage together, caught in a political conspiracy she was only just beginning to see the edges of. Vespera reached up, her clawed hand, lethal enough to shear through body armor, engulfed his palm. He didn't flinch. He just pulled her up, steady and strong, an anchor in the shifting gravity of her world. A political conspiracy dismantled by two enemies forced to share a cage. It sounded like the plot of a trashy orbital holovid, but as Kale projected the data onto the suite's wall, the reality was much colder. Vespera watched the scrolling lines of code, the diagnostic logs of her kinetic dampeners from the match. They hadn't just failed, they had been remotely throttled by a signature belonging to Thrax's house. "I don't understand," Vespera whispered, her scales shimmering in a confused mottled purple. "Why would he risk the arena's sanctity? It's against every tenet of the great game." Kyle sat on the edge of the bed, his face illuminated by the flickering blue light. "Honestly, Vespera, I think that's the point. He knew you'd never suspect it because you're too busy following the rules to notice he's rewritten them." The human looked at her, his expression softening into that terrifyingly gentle Terran empathy. He reached out, hesitating for a second before placing a hand over hers. His skin was so much warmer than hers, a steady heat that seemed to seep through her armor and settle deep in her chest. "He cheated because he's afraid of you," Kyle said, "and we're going to use that." The following solar cycle was a blur of whispered strategy and baffling human instinct. Kyle didn't teach her new strikes. Her biology was already perfected for the kill. Instead, he taught her how to be messy. He taught her about the human bond of a feint, the psychological weight of a smile in a death match, and the sheer chaotic power of doing the one thing your opponent hasn't prepared for. "You want me to stop?" Vespera asked, staring at him as they practiced in the center of the suite. Not stop. Just pause, Kale explained, his breathing heavy. Human adaptability, Vespera. When he lunges, don't parry. Just step back. Let him fall into the vacuum he created. Make him look desperate. The rematch was held under the cold glare of the High Court. Thrax stood opposite her, his mandibles clicking in smug satisfaction, unaware that his tactical advantage had been dismantled by the man now standing in the victor's box. The fight was over in less than 3 minutes. Vespera didn't use the rigid, traditional katas of her lineage. She moved like water, or perhaps she moved like Kale. When Thrax swung his heavy glaive, expecting a clash of steel, Vespera simply wasn't there. She danced around his momentum, her movements a mockery of his predictable aggression. When the final blow came, it wasn't a strike to his heart, but a precision kick to the knee that sent him crashing into the dust at her feet. She stood over him, her pulse racing, her dual hearts singing in a harmony she'd never felt before. The crowd screamed for blood. The law of the arena demanded his head. Vespera looked up at the victor's box, catching Kale's eyes. He didn't nod. He didn't cheer. He just watched her with a quiet, steady pride. True honor lies in mercy, not blind adherence to the law, she announced, her voice booming through the stadium speakers. Her scales were a brilliant, triumphant gold. Thrax is a cheat, and his life is too small a price for the stain he has put on this arena. He is banished. The silence that followed was heavy, ancient, and then, slowly, it broke into a roar of approval. Hours later, back in the quiet sanctuary of the suite, the adrenaline had finally begun to ebb. Vespera stood by the window, watching the twin moons of her homeworld rise. She felt Kyle approach behind her, his presence a familiar warmth. "You did it," he said softly. "No," she corrected, turning to face him. "We did it." She looked at the collar around his neck, the thin silver band of servitude he had worn for her sake. With a steady hand, she reached out and pressed the release code. The metal clicked and fell away, hitting the floor with a hollow chime. "I'm abolishing the servitude laws tomorrow," Vespera said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I was wondering if you might stay. Not as a servant, not even as a guest." Kyle smiled, that lopsided human thing that made her internal temperature spike in the most pleasant way possible. Alien arrogance meets human adaptability in the arena. And maybe, yeah, everywhere else too. "Truth is," he murmured, stepping into her personal space, "I've grown kind of fond of the view." Vespera didn't wait for him to bridge the final gap. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, her scales shifting into a soft, glowing pink. It was a culture shock she was more than happy to adapt to.